everyone. Welcome, welcome. It is Off the Couch where psychology meets everyday life. This is Dr. Greg Cason, and I'm coming to you from a remote location. It's a complete secret here in Palm Springs. Oops, I gave it away. But there you go. We're here, and we're going to talk about the latest in psychology today. I'm here with Zoe Yeoman, who is an etiquette expert. Hello, say hello, Zoe.
Hello, Zoe.
And Brian Gomez, who joins the conversation. He is our producer, but has some really cool stuff to talk about today.
Hey, how's it going, you guys? Happy Monday. We're here again.
Happy Monday. Okay, well, today on Off the Couch, we're going to be talking 7 phrases that show that you may have emotional intelligence, so stay tuned. 3 weird ways that you can get happy, and 1 surefire loneliness cure. We're also going to be talking about West Africa's innovative solution to a therapist shortage there. And then we're going to be talking about etiquette expert. Zoe is going to give us the secret sauce that can help any social encounter. Okay, you guys. So I want you two to sit back and just kind of think about this. Have you heard any of these statements recently? I'm not changing. This is who I am. I don't care how you feel. It's your fault I feel this way. You're just wrong. Stop being so crazy. I can't forgive you. And your feelings are irrational. Have you heard those recently, anybody?
That would be a big fat no.
Oh, good.
No.
You haven't? How about you, Brian?
I have.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I hear these, I just hear these casually thrown around all the time, especially things like, you're wrong, stop being crazy, it's your fault I feel this way. And people will say, I'm not changing, this is who I am. They'll often say that about others, but let's talk about what those mean. This is actually not from a study. I actually got this from an article this week on the CNBC website. This is done by psychologist Courtney Warren. I just thought it was kind of a nice little touch on a concept known as emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence, or EQ, is the old word for it was EQ, like IQ, but for emotions. It is the ability to perceive and evaluate feelings accurately in ourselves and others. So people with good EQ can access emotion, they can understand nonverbal cues, and they can regulate their own feelings. Okay? So how about let's just start with the first one. You guys talk about what your responses are. I'm not changing, this is who I am. Now the low EQ, this shows low EQ because it's more rigid and it fights efforts to change. Is that familiar to anyone? I hear this one a lot. Yeah, this is a high EQ response might be, I need to think more about what you're saying. I want to be open to feedback about myself, even when it's hard to hear. So people that refuse to change, I don't care. I've heard this, especially about people who are older. People will often say, well, he's so-and-so, he's 70 years old, he'll never change. That is absolutely untrue. People don't change because they don't want to change. And basically, if we looked at it from a learning theory standpoint, we all kind of get in a behavioral rut. So to make changes becomes very difficult sometimes, but we can still do it. That's the good news.
That is
Okay,
something we
now-
always hear in an older generation, that they're pretty much more stubborn than we are.
Well, honestly, I hear it from all ages, but I do hear it. I do hear it applied to people who are older, as if to give up on them changing. And I would encourage everyone to never give up on change. Okay, number 2, I don't care how you feel. This demonstrates a blatant disregard for someone's feelings and a lack of empathy. So a high EQ response might be, I'm sorry to hear you're feeling upset. How can I be helpful right now? By the way, feelings are really, really important. And when someone demonstrates a lack of caring about how someone else feels, it can be something we call invalidating. And invalidating actually causes people's feelings to get much stronger. I liken it to like an electrical wire that needs a ground. And when you invalidate somebody, you're actually not providing the ground. It's like you're providing them like sort of a pushback of all the energy, and then it just explodes inside of them. So never do that, you guys. Okay, number three, it's your fault I'm feeling this way. This is demonstrates a low EQ because this is the person who is often blames other people for their feelings and doesn't recognize their own internal mechanisms for feelings. So when we talk about feelings, we're often talking, there's a whole constellation of things that happen to create emotion in our body, but one of them is our perception and interpretation of the events we're seeing in front of us, including another person's actions, including to what's happening around us, including to our own physiology and our own signals coming from inside. So we really need to kind of understand this in order to to make something different. A high EQ response might be I'm feeling very emotional right now, and my perception of the situation is that. So you're basically saying, you know, I'm feeling emotional and I'm seeing things this way. It's sort of like staying neutral to the facts and trying to check in with the other person, but still relate your own feelings. Sound good?
Yeah.
And number four, you're just wrong. This is a low EQ response because you can get stuck in extremes and you don't look for nuance. This is the person I've railed against this before. This is the absolutistic thinker. This is the person who sees things as all good or all bad, all black or all white. A high EQ response is I want to hear your perspective even when I don't do. And can you help me understand why you're feeling this way or why you believe these things that you do? And this is a really helpful response, or I just really want to understand and try to stay as neutral as a person with a high EQ can really manage their own feelings so they don't get too reactive, even though inside they might be going, I have no idea why this person believes this thing or is so upset or something, but you try to get into their shoes and have them help you with that. And that will create that connection, that validating for emotion. So it's actually very helpful. Number five, stop being crazy. A low EQ response is to overreact to others and to take things personally. So she wrote a high EQ response. I'm going to read it, but I have an issue with it. I'll just say. What she said is, I understand you're really struggling right now. So far, that's great. Like, love that. So I really understand you're struggling. Although I hear that you're upset with me, this is what I don't like this part. I think that your reaction may have more to do with your past than it does with what I'm doing right now. Do you think that's true? What do you think that person's going to say when you respond? Are you just so taken by your past that it doesn't matter at that point? The person's having a reaction. You've got to be in the moment with the person. And you don't create some kind of blame structure about their past. Instead, you're wanting to kind of really get into their reality and understand things. I understand you're struggling right now, is what I would say. I would go back to that other response of help me to understand. And if they relate it to their past, great. If they don't, great. If you think it's about their past, but they don't go there. That's the bottom line. It's not helpful.
Right.
Okay. I can't forgive you. These are the people who are unforgiving. And we will do a whole show sometime on forgiveness because it's such an important concept. A low EQ person is less secure and they believe that forgiveness is weakness. So a high EQ response would be, I'm having a hard time forgiving you right now. Like you can be open that you're having a hard time about that, but I'm actively working to let go of this resentment and anger. And that's really the key of forgiveness is letting go of the resentment and the anger and the emotional response. It doesn't absolve the person of their sins. I think that's what a lot of people get it mixed up with, like what a priest might do. But it's really about being able to let go of that grip that it holds on you. That's why you see people in court expressing forgiveness of a person who's killed their daughter or their son. And people react so negatively to that, saying, I would never forgive them. And maybe they wouldn't. I would think that would be a tough one. But what those people are doing is being able to try to purge themselves of the resentment and anger that will eventually grip them and eat them alive. So I admire that they're able to work on that and do that. And so that's the bottom line of that. And your feelings are irrational. This is a place I never go because I never view any feelings as irrational. Rather, especially in cognitive therapy, we look at thoughts as irrational, but the feelings that follow them are the natural outcome. So we don't ever say someone's feelings are irrational. So a low EQ response is I can't step into someone else's oh, I'm sorry. The low EQ person can't step into someone else's shoes and they can't acknowledge the other person's feelings. A high EQ response is I need to think more about what you're saying. I want to be open about myself even when it's hard to hear.
It's
So sound familiar, guys?
definitely. It's funny because I just started watching the Beverly Hills Housewives. I haven't really watched the series or anything, but they pretty much went through all of those steps: the low IQ ones or EQ ones, and the high ones, which I was kind of surprised. But in one of the episodes, they had like a healing retreat and literally went step by step, and did the high EQ steps that you were mentioning. So it was cool that you talked about it, and I visually saw it.
Right on, ladies. I love it when people show growth. It's the funny thing about reality TV, I can say, is the dramatic moments will make the screen, and so it reinforces the actor or whatever they're considered, the person who's there, to try to be as dramatic as they can. So, but I do believe they actually pick people to be on those shows who have an easy time being that dramatic. So. We'll just have to see. Okay, you guys. So three weird ways to get happy. I thought these were great because happiness I always hear about. Don't we always hear about this? We all have this goal to be happy. And a lot of people mix up happiness in the moment, which I would call joy, with happiness in the long run, which a lot of people call satisfaction. Um, but happiness, we know it when we have it. And it can be short range or long range. So it can be in the near term or the long term. And these methods are short range, but they contribute to long range happiness. So let's go here. The problem of loneliness, the US Surgeon General released a study in May of 2023 that called loneliness and isolation an epidemic. And the World Health Organization, they called loneliness a global health concern, and they equated loneliness as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Do either of you ever feel?
Yes.
Yes, I feel. I mean, it's kind of weird if somebody hasn't ever felt lonely. Then I'd be a little worried about that one.
It's interesting because being alone and lonely are different things. And so we do want to kind of differentiate those. Being alone is really just being alone. It's the very act of not being with somebody, but that doesn't equate to being lonely. Loneliness is usually a longing for somebody else's presence when you're alone. So it's an additional step that happens.
And it's kind of a new feeling for me.
Oh, is it? Oh, yes.
It
Wow.
is. I've never kind of ever felt it before, but I moved recently. So I live in a place that's kind of new to us. So there are times when, yeah, I definitely feel lonely.
Well, that's really interesting. And we're going to give you some cures, if you will. We'll give you some
That's
things to do that actually are not too tough and they're pretty wonderful, I think. That's why I really like this. The first was this being alone study. First of all, I want you to look at that, Zoe, and say, think about your own experience as we talk about this one. The University of Reading did some research and they looked at the relationship between your time spent alone and your mental health. And they published it in scientific reports. That was out this week. The researchers tracked 178 adults, 35 and older, both in the UK and the US, 21 days, and they used diaries to record time spent alone versus others. And they measured stress, life satisfaction, autonomy, like that autonomy is being in charge of your life, and loneliness. And this is what they found. The study found that solitude has both benefits and costs for well-being. This is really good because it's interesting to know that there are good things and bad things, just like everything. And there's no clear balance between solitude and socializing. So, sorry, Zoe, there is no right amount of loneliness. You just know it when it's there. So, for you, it's obviously a contrast to what you used to have, which is more of a socializing, more of a social life than perhaps in the new place.
And I think also outside of the house, actually being with clients and doing all that, things have changed because he retired. So it's my life is very different now.
Yeah, I can imagine your life is quite different. Um, But let's talk about that because being alone can be really good. You can spend more hours alone. When you spend more hours alone, it can be linked to reduced stress and it can be calming. It can also, you feel the freedom to choose to be yourself. You feel more autonomy, like you're more in charge of your life. So that's a really good thing. So we should lean in.
That's the big upside. Yes.
It's a big upside. But if we have too much, and again, it's subjective, if we have too much, people reported being lonely and less satisfied with life. So that's just kind of an interesting thing. So it looks like personal choice is the key. And it's interesting, although maybe moving was a choice of yours, Zoe, but maybe it wasn't, maybe being alone isn't a choice. And
Sure.
so that's where we actually run into it. Because when we don't feel the choice, we have more of a negative effect. That's what this research showed, and I don't think that's such a striking finding, but it's interesting. It said that solitude motivated by personal choice versus enforced by external factors. So when it's motivated by personal choice, we do much better. This was interesting to me because of the pandemic, which our entire world went through, and we experienced this on so many different levels. This was hard for so many people because being alone as enforced. And in some places it was. I think New York was especially hit hard, especially because people live in these tiny apartments and they felt stuck inside and they couldn't go out, and it was really a rough thing. How was the pandemic for you guys
Oh yeah, I
being
definitely
alone?
struggled with it a little bit too, just because I was really social at the time too. And like Zoe said, that loneliness feeling of like being in a new environment, I felt it in the military too when I was in different trainings and like when I finally got stationed somewhere, that it was very like, wow, I'm not alone, but it feels lonely because it's all new. Everything's new, everybody's new. There's no familiar faces or anything, no home's not close by, but yeah, that was my experience with the pandemic too. It felt very alone in that sense.
And just military just really strikes me because you have forced moves. They station you here or there. That's an experience that probably so many people have just on a constant basis because the military moves them around and they have no choice about where they go.
Yep.
So, how about for you, Zoe? How was the pandemic? Were you able to weather it okay?
I initially was really enjoying it because, didn't have to do anything, didn't have to go any, didn't need an excuse to sit and stream 6 hours of binge. And then, of course, after a while, it got to be a little hard. And we had just moved to Mexico and it was shut down heavily. So, okay, then they open up. And now it's like, well, what restaurants do we go to? Where do we, because we had only just moved. So it was kind of a double whammy on both sides. And I think I was actually kind of in denial about how it affected me. And I am dealing with that right now.
All right. Good, good
As
for
long as we're
you.
dealing with
Yeah, no,
it.
I think that's the experience of so many people that they go through. You know, that a lot of people were like, "Yeah, we can do this 2 weeks, no sweat,
A
like a
big deal.
vacation. I'll clean my closet or not, um, or make fun videos for Instagram." But boy, yeah, it got hard. It got hard for a lot of people.
And then we didn't know when
Um,
it was going to end either. Like we didn't know when or what was coming next. So that was kind of hard to deal with too.
That's exactly right, because a lot of people didn't know when it would end. And it's funny, Brian helped me with a video. I don't know if you remember this, Brian. Remember I did a video on uh, the first SARS pandemic, and that they had and which was a much smaller scale, and that they did, forced isolation of people, and that a lot of people, 25% came out with PTSD or depression or major depression. So it was a pretty major concern, and we saw that this might happen, and I think it's something we're just observing, and it's going to have some long-lasting effects. Um,
I think between people losing their jobs, people losing loved ones, I mean, not being able to see your elderly father for years during that time. I mean, there was a lot. It was just really a lot of stuff.
I had
I
a
think the
friend that
hard.
oh
Oh,
no sorry. I had a friend that was having a baby during that time. Like I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
oh yeah, and weddings, etc. I think the hardest moment for me in the entire pandemic, I went to see my mother, and it was fairly soon after. And I said, so I think I was wearing a mask and she was, and I'm like, so can I give you a hug? And she said, no. And it really was, I mean, it was just a real off thing, and I completely understand. We didn't know. But I just remember feeling that so strongly, even though I knew it was the right thing, because we didn't know what would happen. We didn't know. And we can't go backwards and say we should have known. We just didn't know what was what. And that was just so hard for so many. Otherwise, I'd say for me, it was a little bit easier. And this is how I talk to myself, because I did go outside and take walks. I did talk on the phone. I didn't like Zoom calls, to be honest. Those Zoom parties, I did like a couple, and I'm like, okay, that's no fun. But the whole time I knew it was temporary, as we all did. But I think some people really panicked and thought this was our life for the rest of the world. Um, but I kept thinking we're all in this together, and that feeling of we're all in this together really help things with me. Like I felt like we were all joined in a common goal, and I think looking back, that was probably one of the healthier things I did during that time. Not eating all the cake and gaining, 10, 20 pounds. I don't know how much I gained, but still working on it. So,
You and me both.
so let's talk about stranger danger. This was another study. I really like this because this was the Sabancı University in Turkey, and they paired up with the University of Sussex in England, and they found, Zoe, I want you to pay attention here. Simply saying hello to strangers can lead to increased life satisfaction. How about that?
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Yes, this was published in the journal Social, Psychological, and Personality Science. And what they did is they sent out surveys both in Turkey and in England. I love this because it was hitting two different cultures, and they were basically measuring the same concept, and they basically found the same things. Humans are humans everywhere you go. Let's face it, folks. They asked about momentary interactions with strangers, and they measured life satisfaction and general happiness level, and they got 63,000 surveys back. So this was a major study. Their findings were that people who report having momentary interactions with strangers, just saying hello to maybe a short conversation, had higher levels of life satisfaction and loneliness versus people who keep to themselves or avoid talking to strangers. the people felt more a part of a community and they felt more personally valued. I thought this was incredible. You guys have a reaction to this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I agree with this because I've built a gym family, I call it, just from that interaction. I ran into a friend from the gym, and he had told me how he was making it a goal to say hi to more people because we see those people every single day at the same time. I see them more than like my family and friends most of the time. That it made sense that I should get to know them and say hello. And ever since then, I feel so love going to that gym. Like I love seeing those people daily. They know everything about my life pretty much, you know? So it's,
This
I
is
agree with
this
it.
is from the person who told me he never talked to anybody at the
I'm
gym.
not a fan of talking to people at the gym or yeah, in the mornings, yeah. So for me, that was huge and I love seeing those people. It's weird.
Okay.
So he changed
I did. I
from
had.
not being that guy to now being that guy. And it's made him happier, which is what we were just talking about.
I'm the
I
proof.
mean, yeah, that's exactly it. Good.
My dad, when I would go to visit my father in his small town in Delaware, it didn't matter where we went. He always spoke to everybody, and a lot of them knew who he was. So as
Excellent.
a senior citizen, this is a really good thing to get out of the house and have people say, "Hey, how you doing today? Sarge, blah blah blah." So very cool.
Yeah, I think it's especially hard in LA, and probably New York has the same thing and other major cities because, oh, I remember Houston being this. Oh my goodness, Houston was weird because people were very wonderful and sort of warm in sort of actions in a store or where you had something, but sometimes people were a little more standoffish when I lived there. But from being from LA, I didn't think a huge amount of it. It was unfortunate. One thing I've always liked to do, I've always generally said hello to people because it seems awkward when you're passing someone on the street. You want to acknowledge them. But in LA, I will tell you, maybe 8 times out of 10, people don't respond back. They look forward. They're not on headphones or anything. They just don't want to engage. And in a way, I don't blame them because maybe here we have more than our fair share of people who might be problematic, but it's really unfortunate. So,
Yeah.
visiting a museum is the last one. That was probably the coolest thing to me. And this wasn't a study, it's just a hypothesis. I still wanted to talk about it because I think this shows promise. Kind of gives them a kind of a mutual talking point, and then they can kind of interact with that. But the dog itself, we talked about the surefire. A dog itself can combat loneliness. It creates a connection, an emotional connection with the dog, and physical contact with the dog that helps tremendously. So you're in for good stuff, Brian. Just going to
Yeah.
be a lot of work like a kid.
I love her, and she is acting just like a kid. But when she does cuddle, and she's good, she's really good for the most part. Today was just one of those difficult days. But she's amazing. She's amazing. I'm obsessed. Yeah.
I'm going to run through the rest. I had a cat. Unfortunately, it passed, and I'll tell you, it was just emotionally so devastating. But that's life. But this cats do the same thing. So good news for cat people out there. Fostering a cat. This is a study this week. Fostering a cat can ease loneliness. This was still a pilot study. It's a small study of 29 people, so it's going to need to be reproduced in a larger way. But they took people who were 60 and older, living alone, and had no pets. This was done by the University of Georgia and Brno University, both in Georgia, the state of Georgia, not in the Soviet Union or Russia, sorry, or Georgia, the country. Oh my goodness, I'm getting them all mixed up.
We
So
knew what you meant.
we're here in the US. So anyway, study participants agreed to shelter cats for 4 months with the option to adopt. So they got these people to agree. They measured them initially. And they did cognitive tests, physical and mental health tests. Then they repeated that at 1 month, 4 months, and 1 year intervals. And what did they find? They found that it does indeed help with loneliness and general health, and it helps challenge their cognitive functioning because they have to meet they have to meet the needs of the pet. They have to, care for it, change its litter box, feed it, think about it, and all those different things. And it all is a good thing. So no downsides, folks. A lot of people will try to talk to me and say, "Oh, I want to have my dog certified as emotional support." I'm like, "Well, all animals are emotional support. Can they function without their animal in tow?" Is basically it. And if they do, then they're probably in a more there are people like with very intensive psychological diagnosis that do use dogs as service dogs. So,
Yeah, I think it helps the elderly. I think it helps people who are recently widowed. I have friends that, got a dog or a cat or whatever right after their spouse died. Empty nesters like having a dog when they know that the kids are a couple years away from going to college. So Brian decided that he needed and was excited about getting a puppy. So yeah, they're so great for so many of us.
it is really incredible. Yeah. So, and I will say I've met Brian's dog, and she is incredible, so sweet and so nice and quite beautiful. So, I'd say you won the lottery with that one.
That's how I feel, honestly.
So let's talk about psychology in the news. I need to, I'm going to rush through this just because of time, folks. So sorry about that. I got advice from a grad student when I was a freshman at UCLA that really has come back in many ways. This student said, everyone in Los Angeles needs a good hairdresser, a good therapist, and a good mechanic. Wise words, I must say. But that brings us to the New York Times story that you found, Brian, that seems to incorporate some of this. Tell us about it.
Yes, so the New York Times published an article on November 26th this year, and it is called Need Therapy. In West Africa, hairdressers can help. So there is a nonprofit organization by the name of Blue Mind Foundation that was started by a French entrepreneur. Her name is Marie-Alix de Puteaux, and she decided to do this because after her husband passed, she went through a really hard time, and her hairdresser was with her by her side the entire time. So in West Africa, there's a program that about 150 women now have received the mental health training. It's like the 3-day sessions that they get, and they become mental health ambassadors. So they're giving them the tools to pretty much ask, or they're training them in to learn how to ask open-ended questions, spot nonverbal signs of distress like headaches, disheveled clothes, and just pretty much pick up on things that their clients are telling them. From my experience, my last 3 barbers, they've been like my therapists or like my little daily journals. So I think this is an amazing thing that they're doing in West Africa. They focused on 2 interviews, specifically in the country of Togo and in their capital, Lomé. That's where they interviewed one of the hair salon mental health ambassadors, and really they went and explained the story of how one of their clients went through it and how she was able to help her by even suggesting a different hairstyle and then suggesting her to walk to this like nearby lagoon. The whole story was beautiful, where it's like cool to see it because they're one of the places where it's almost impossible to get mental health help, and it's just something that they can't really afford, when they can afford to at least go into the hair salon and get their hair done, and just they're being saved by people that are just helping them, while they're doing their hair at the same time.
Beautiful.
I think this is especially important in Africa. The World Health Organization classified the African region as the highest suicide rate in the world and had one of the lowest public spending on mental health in the world. They only have about 1.6 mental health providers per 100,000 people. Contrast that to the United States, where we have 350 mental health providers for every 100,000. It's quite dramatic. So I was really encouraged. I thought this was a beautiful story as well, and really creates a different way for us to start to see things.
Yeah, in the country of Togo, they only have 5 psychiatrists.
I'm surprised they have that many.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have 5, right? Yeah.
Just 5,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
In the country of, as opposed to
Yeah.
the city. Yeah. Okay. Right. So Okay. Also, I just want to talk to you really quickly about the Supreme Court finding that announced it will not hear a case challenging Washington State's restriction of an anti-LGBTQ practice known as conversion therapy. Really quickly, conversion therapy is when we try to change someone's sexual orientation, or not me, but when people try to change someone's sexual orientation, usually from LGBTQ identified to heterosexual, and try to change someone who is trans or non-binary and try to get them to identify as someone who is cisgender, or to have the identity match the birth assignment, and to also they or at least in conversion therapy, if they can't get them to change, which I don't know of a successful treatment, they get them to suppress the behavior. This has been an incredibly destructive practice that has been linked to so many suicides, so much PTSD, and so many kinds of trauma. It's just been incredibly destructive. And this was surprising. The Supreme Court just decided a free speech thing. This was done under free speech, and they allowed anti-LGBTQ business owners to discriminate against LGBTQ people in Colorado. So this was kind of a surprise. APA says conversion therapy puts individuals at risk for harm and is not effective. Currently, 20 states and DC have adopted anti-conversion therapy laws. So we are, at least some good things happen, even though it's just a little one there. But that was pretty cool.
A win is a win. That's
A win is a win, and we'll celebrate it when we can. Yeah. So three of the justices, just to point out, did want to hear it and didn't want to turn it down. Four turned it down. So that was pretty close. This is why the Supreme Court is such an important body, and people should all be aware of it as part of their just understanding, because it impacts everything, including mental health. So Zoe, we're gonna talk about doing the right thing. You're gonna explain. Well, I said the importance of you said the well, you're gonna explain the importance of etiquette. I called it the secret sauce in positive social interactions. Tell us what you have.
Well, whenever we use the term etiquette, we open ourselves up to other people's projection, their stigma around us, right? So it's not about, pinkies up and tut tut and all of that. It's about kindness, consideration, warmth, confidence, self-esteem, self-respect, respect for others. It's a pretty big pie of things. And so when you're in a social situation, if you're uncomfortable, it may be because you haven't been taught a few of the EQ ideals or some of the soft skills that will open you up so that others can feel that, that good energy and get this is a person I really would like to speak to. This is a person I'd really like to spend more time with, that kind of thing. So it helps one not only in a day-to-day, work environment, but it certainly helps one when making friends, doing social sorts of things. And it's a great skill set to really have.
I think it is such a great skill set. One, it helps you feel confident entering a social situation that you kind of know what to do, because sometimes you don't, like you said. And the other, that it helps the other person feel comfortable. Isn't that the bottom line?
It is the bottom line.
And yeah,
that's what it's about, is putting other people at ease.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. And that's why I think it's an important skill for all of us to have. I think so many people get etiquette mixed up with where to, the right fork and which wine glass to use in this situation. And oh my goodness. And yeah, that's part of it, isn't it? I mean, certainly with dining, especially fine dining, you kind of want to know how to navigate around a table. And because then when you're not navigating properly, other people might notice. But to me, the worst etiquette faux pas would be to point out somebody's mistake. Instead, what I do love is when people help them without pointing it out, just kind of help them
What kind of person would ever embarrass someone else, intentionally? That's what we just call rude or bad manners, right? So manners training just is another form of education. It's just another layer for being considered worldly or being considered educated. There's lots of ways to find out how to properly shake somebody's hand and not to put your wet Coca-Cola glass on the piano. I mean, these are really little things, but they really tell people maybe who you were raised by or things that you might think are important, and will afford people kind of an openness to want you to be around more often, you know?
That's such a great thing to say. My mother, and I hate to make the show keep bringing her in, but the she's wonderful, and she said, I used to go and interview people in their homes, people who were drug addicts. So I would go to, sometimes fairly dicey areas, and sometimes, all across the country. And one thing she said is, oh, if they offer you something to drink, always take it. You don't have to drink it, but you always take it. And I thought that was oddly very wonderful. I did always drink it because I'm always thirsty. So it was a social transaction that to me being kind would be to say no, so they don't have to go through the effort. But it's what you're demonstrating there is I'm comfortable in your house and thank you for this gift that you're giving me of this water or something like that. I always thought that was such a nice thing and it always worked out well. If someone didn't offer, that was okay. I just didn't say anything. But when they did, I always took it.
A lot of these things are very, regional. So, Southerners tend to be very kind of yes, ma'am, no, sir, all of that good stuff. Northeasterners, right? So if you're a kid from, Oklahoma and you end up going to Yale or Harvard, there are probably a few things that you might want to know about how to comport yourself around other people. But the same would be true if you're working for a law firm. And this is one of the things that they would do is to take you out to a meal to see whether or not they
Wow.
could send you to a client. So there's so many, and that's, just a whole different scale. But it's just nice to know some of the smaller things that matter that people notice.
That is so interesting, Zoe. I can't tell you how many meals I've been on that were parts of job interviews. And it's interesting because they're kind of couched sometimes in let's get casual, but you do always have to pay attention to what's going on.
Ideally, if you can. Being, being present matters. Being comfortable and confident matters. That's the thing that really matters.
Yes. So I think we covered a lot of really important things today. We talked about loneliness and happiness. We talked about Brian's dog. We talked about Zoe telling us the importance of etiquette and how that will help us all. And, we covered the three things that I like to talk about, which is to be present. Zoe just said it, being present is important. Being flexible, which is, that's the emotional quotient, EQ stuff right there. And being kind, which just all comes down to. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Dr. Craig.
Thank you guys for having me.
Okay, see you next.